The divers moved carefully through the wreckage, their flashlights cutting through the dark water. Suddenly, an enormous shadow loomed in the distance. What they thought was part of the wreck shifted, then charged. A massive 25-foot great white shark rushed toward them, striking with terrifying force. One diver was knocked unconscious, sinking helplessly as the predator circled again. Another diver's equipment was torn apart, leaving them scrambling to escape. Desperation set in as they signaled frantically for help, but the shark wasn't done. These are 6 stories of terrifying shark encounters that ended in horror. On January 18, 2025, the sun rose over the calm waters off the coast of South Australia. It was a perfect day for diving, and Jason Clark, a 35-year-old professional diver, was eager to lead his team to an exciting new site. They had planned this dive for weeks, excited to explore a deep-sea wreck about 20 miles off the coast near Port Lincoln. Known for its rich marine life and deep waters, the area was famous among divers, but it also carried risks. The cold, deep waters were home to one of the ocean's most feared predators, great white sharks. Jason and his team, Aaron Mills, 30, Brian Hayes, 42, Mark Evans, 28, and Sophie Lynch, 33, arrived at the marina early. They loaded their gear onto the boat and checked oxygen tanks, regulators, and underwater cameras. Everyone was in high spirits, laughing and discussing what they might find at the wreck. The boat's captain, David Cross, reminded them of the safety protocols before steering them out to sea. The trip took nearly an hour, and excitement grew as they neared the wreck's coordinates. The ocean was calm, and visibility looked promising. The group suited up, securing their masks and fins before giving each other the final check. Jason signaled, and one by one they slipped beneath the water, leaving the surface behind. As they descended, the wreck came into view. The ship had been sitting on the ocean floor for decades, covered in coral and swarming with fish. Schools of silverfish darted past as the divers explored, their flashlights cutting through the murky water. They moved slowly, taking in the details of the sunken vessel, pausing to capture footage and examine the marine life that had made the wreck their home. After nearly 30 minutes, Jason led the group farther from the wreck, wanting to explore more of the surrounding area before ascending. Mark pointed ahead as they drifted through the water, signaling that he had seen something large in the distance. At first they thought it might be a whale. Its size and slow movement gave that impression. But as they got closer, an unsettling realization set in. It wasn't a whale. It was a great white shark, unlike anything they had ever seen. The shark was massive, easily over 25 feet long, its body gliding effortlessly through the water. Jason felt his chest tighten. He had seen sharks before, but this one was different. It was too large, too fast, and moving with a purpose. The group froze, watching the shark from a safe distance, hoping it would pass by without noticing them. Then, without warning, the shark turned sharply and charged toward them. Its powerful tail sent a surge of water their way, and before anyone could react, it struck Aaron with such force that his regulator was knocked from his mouth. He tumbled backward, crashing into part of the wreck and losing consciousness. Sophie rushed to him, grabbing his arm and trying to keep him steady, while Jason signaled for an emergency ascent. Panic spread through the group. The shark circled them, moving quickly, its dark eyes locked onto the struggling divers. Brian fumbled with his dive knife, hoping to scare it away, but the shark ignored him. Instead, it lunged again, this time going straight for Mark. The shark's jaws closed around Mark's leg, tearing through his wetsuit and flesh. Blood clouded the water instantly. Mark's muffled screams filled the ocean as he thrashed, trying to break free. Jason swam toward him, striking the shark with his camera, but the predator held on. Brian and Sophie joined in, stabbing at the shark with their knives, desperate to force it to let go. After what felt like an eternity, the shark released Mark, but the damage was done. Blood streamed from his leg as Sophie grabbed him, trying to keep him from slipping into shock. Jason signaled frantically toward the surface, and the group began their ascent, struggling to move quickly without drawing more attention. The shark wasn't finished. It circled again, staying just beneath them, following their every move. Jason's mind raced. He knew they were still too deep to surface too fast, but the situation gave them no choice. He looked at Aaron, who was barely conscious, and Mark, who was bleeding heavily. They had to get out. Kicking as hard as they could, the group finally reached the surface, gasping for air as they waved desperately toward the boat. Captain David had been watching the water nervously and acted fast. He pulled them onto the deck one by one, his eyes widening when he saw the blood pouring from Mark's leg. The shark surfaced briefly, its dorsal fin slicing through the water just feet from the boat, then disappearing deep. On board, Aaron regained consciousness, groggy and disoriented. Mark lay on the deck, his face pale, trembling from shock. Sophie held pressure on his wound while Jason barked instructions, trying to keep everyone calm. David radioed for emergency help as he pushed the throttle to full speed, heading back toward shore. Mark's blood soaked through the towels they wrapped around his leg. Sophie whispered reassurances, but the fear in her eyes was clear. Brian sat beside Aaron, shaking his head in disbelief. None of them could comprehend what had just happened. They reached the marina in record time, where paramedics were waiting. Mark was rushed to the hospital, his leg severely injured, but his life was spared. Aaron, though bruised and shaken, escaped without major injury. News of the attack spread quickly. Experts speculated that the unusually large shark had been drawn to the wreck, possibly using it as a hunting ground. Some believed it had been tracking the divers from the moment they entered its territory. For Jason and his team, the experience left scars beyond the physical injuries. Once a place of adventure and excitement, the ocean now carried a weight of fear. Their dream dive had turned into a battle for survival, a reminder of how quickly things could change beneath the surface. On the morning of March 2nd, 2022, Captain Tom Reeves stood at the edge of the dock in Santa Cruz, California, staring out at the waves excitedly. The Sea Serpent, his 40-foot sport fishing boat, was ready for another trip, and the weather conditions looked perfect. Tom, 47 years old, and with over 2 decades of experience on the water, had planned this trip carefully. His crew, Mark Bennett, 39, Eric Hall, 42, and Jake Ellis, 35, were close friends and seasoned fishermen who had spent countless hours at sea together. The day had started like any other. The men loaded their gear onto the boat, checking rods, bait, and safety equipment. Their eyes were set on the deeper waters off the coast, known for rich fishing grounds. Over the past few weeks, there had been scattered reports of large sharks in the area, but Tom wasn't worried. He had seen great whites before, and they usually kept their distance. The air was filled with laughter and conversation as they left the harbor. The men swapped stories about their best catches, cracking jokes as the boat cruised into the ocean. Tom guided the vessel toward a familiar spot about 15 miles offshore, where the waters were known to hold large tuna and other prized fish. After dropping anchor, the group cast their lines and settled in for what they expected to be an easy, relaxing day. The sun reflected off the water, and the boat rocked gently. Hours passed, and the crew reeled in several good-sized fish. Spirits were high. Then, without warning, something massive hit the side of the boat. The impact was so strong that it sent a shudder through the vessel. Everyone looked at each other in confusion before another violent hit nearly knocked Jake off his feet. Mark rushed to the edge, peering into the water, and what he saw made his stomach drop. A massive great white shark, at least 20 feet long, circled the boat. Its dorsal fin sliced through the water, and its dark silhouette moved ominously beneath the surface. At first, the men watched in awe, but their admiration quickly turned to fear as the shark rammed the boat again, harder this time. The vessel lurched and equipment tumbled across the deck. Tom quickly assessed the situation. He knew they needed to act soon, so he ordered them to secure the loose gear and prepare to pull up the anchor. Eric scrambled to the controls, but before they could move, the shark struck again, hitting the stern with incredible force. The boat rocked violently, and the engine sputtered. Panic set in. Tom knew they couldn't afford another hit like that. He grabbed a long metal pole and moved to the back of the boat, hoping to deter the shark. As he leaned over, trying to push it away, the shark surged up, hitting the ship's side with enough force to send Tom overboard. He hit the water with a splash, the shock of the cold sending a jolt through his body. The crew shouted his name, scrambling to throw him a life ring. Tom fought to stay afloat, kicking against the water. The shark turned toward him instantly, drawn by the movement. Tom tried to swim back toward the boat, but the predator was too fast. In seconds, it was on him. The crew could only watch in horror as the shark's massive jaws clamped down on Tom's torso, dragging him beneath the surface. His screams were brief, swallowed by the water, and blood spread quickly through the waves. Mark, Jake, and Eric screamed his name, frantically pulling at the rope attached to the life ring, but it came back empty. The water churned with red, and they saw the shark circling beneath the surface, disappearing into the deep with Tom in its grip. In the aftermath, the boat rocked, silent except for the sound of the waves. The remaining crew members were frozen in shock, unable to process what had happened. Jake grabbed the radio and called for help, his voice shaking as he relayed their position and the terrifying details. The Coast Guard responded immediately, dispatching a rescue boat and helicopter to their location. Mark and Eric sat motionless, staring into the water where their captain had disappeared. They knew there was nothing they could do. When the rescue team arrived, they found the men visibly shaken, their faces pale with shock. The Coast Guard searched the area for hours, scanning the water for any sign of Tom. They found his torn life jacket floating miles away, shredded and soaked in blood. The search continued into the night, but only fragments of Tom's clothing were recovered. Authorities concluded that the shark had likely mistaken the boat's vibrations and activity for prey, and once Tom entered the water, there was no chance of escape. The incident sent shockwaves through the local fishing community. Santa Cruz, known for its thriving fishing industry, had never seen an attack like this. The news spread quickly, and authorities immediately closed several popular fishing areas, warning of the increasing aggression of great whites in the region. Marine biologists analyzed the attack and suggested that changing ocean temperatures and declining fish populations could push sharks closer to human activity. They noted that great whites are apex predators, and once they lock onto a target, they rarely back down. The loss was devastating for the Sea Serpent crew. Tom had been more than a captain. He was a friend, a mentor, and a trusted leader. Fishing trips that had once been filled with laughter and camaraderie were now haunted by the memory of what had happened. In the following weeks, many local fishermen reconsidered their routes, avoiding areas where sharks had been sighted. Some even left the business altogether, unwilling to take the risk. Once seen as a place of opportunity and adventure, the ocean now carried a weight of fear and uncertainty. Monterey Bay, California is known for its beautiful coastline and excellent surf conditions. Surfers from all over the country come to ride the waves, enjoying the challenge of the powerful swells and the breathtaking scenery. But beneath the surface, the waters hold something far more dangerous: great white sharks. On April 27, 2021, the ocean claimed another victim in a way no one on that beach would ever forget. James Turner, a 25-year-old surfer, had lived in Monterey for the past few years. Surfing was his passion. He spent most of his free time in the water, often before work or after a long day. That morning, he met a few friends at Spanish Bay, one of his favorite surf spots. The waves were just right, rolling in steadily under the clear sky. James had been in a great mood, cracking jokes and excited to get into the water. The beach was quiet, with only a few other surfers in the distance. James and his friends, Marcus Wells and Tyler Grant, suited up, carried their boards down to the shore and paddled out. The water was cool, and the conditions were perfect for a long session. James paddled further than usual, eager to catch the bigger waves forming beyond the others. As James waited for the right wave, he felt a strange tension in the water. It wasn't something he could explain, just a feeling that something was off. He shook it off and focused on the horizon, watching for the next set. Without warning, the water beneath him shifted. Before he could react, an enormous force hit him from below, sending him flying off his board. He barely had time to process what was happening before being dragged into the depths. The great white shark, nearly 18 feet long, had latched onto his right leg. Its jaws crushed bone and muscle with terrifying ease, pulling him under. James thrashed wildly, his instincts kicking in as he fought to escape. He clawed at the water, trying to reach the surface, but the shark's grip was unrelenting. Seconds stretched into what felt like forever. The pressure in his lungs built as he struggled against the predator. The water around him turned red as blood poured from his mangled leg. Just as suddenly as the attack began, the shark released him, and he shot to the surface, gasping for air. James screamed for help, his face twisted in pain and terror. The other surfers, watching in disbelief, snapped into action. Marcus and Tyler paddled furiously toward him, their hearts racing. When they reached him, they were horrified by the sight. James's lower leg was nearly severed, hanging by strips of flesh. Blood poured into the water around him, spreading fast. They knew they had to get him back to shore, but the shark returned before they could paddle. The massive predator struck again, its powerful jaws clamping down and ripping away the remaining part of James's lower leg. The water exploded in a mix of foam and blood, and James screamed again, his strength fading. Marcus and Tyler grabbed him, paddling with all their might as the shark circled just behind them. The journey back to shore felt endless. James's breathing became shallow and his skin turned pale. Tyler shouted for help as they approached the beach, waving his arms frantically. Beachgoers, realizing something was wrong, rushed to the water's edge. Lifeguards sprinted toward them, grabbing James and dragging him onto the sand. The wound was severe and blood soaked through the towels they pressed against it. James's eyes fluttered, his body trembling from the shock and blood loss. Someone had already called for emergency help, and helicopter blades filled the air within minutes. Paramedics arrived, working quickly to stabilize him. They loaded him onto the stretcher, securing the wound as best they could. As the helicopter lifted off, James's friends stood on the beach, covered in his blood, staring out at the waves. The shark disappeared into the depths, leaving only destruction in its wake. Despite the quick response, the damage was too severe. James succumbed to his injuries before reaching the hospital. The official report confirmed that he had lost too much blood, and his body couldn't handle the trauma. News of the attack spread quickly, shocking the surfing community. Monterey Bay hadn't seen a fatal shark attack in over 15 years, and many surfers had grown comfortable in the waters. The reality of what had happened hit hard. No one was truly safe in the ocean. Authorities issued warnings and temporarily closed the beaches. Marine experts examined the attack and stated that the shark likely mistook James for a seal, drawn in by the movement of his legs underwater. They explained that great whites were apex predators, and once they identified potential prey, their attacks were swift and brutal. James's death left a void in the local surf community. Friends and fellow surfers gathered to honor his memory, sharing stories of his passion for the ocean and his infectious enthusiasm. The spot where he had been attacked now carried an unshakable weight, a reminder of how quickly everything could change in the water. For Marcus and Tyler, the experience haunted them. They replayed the moment in their minds, the feeling of helplessness as the shark attacked, the struggle to get James back to shore. The ocean, once their place of freedom and escape, now felt different, dangerous and unpredictable. The attack served as a harsh reminder of the risks surfers take every time they paddle out. Some avoided the water altogether, while others returned with a newfound caution, constantly scanning the waves for any sign of danger. The beaches eventually reopened, but the memory of James's final moments remained. Surfers would glance at the water, remembering his smile and how he loved the ocean. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in broad daylight, in waters they thought they knew, the sea could still claim its own. On June 21, 2019, Clara Evans woke up early, just like she did every morning, ready for her routine jog along the shore of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. At 50 years old, she had been running this stretch of beach for years. It was a peaceful way to start the day, listening to the waves and feeling the cool sand beneath her feet. That morning, everything seemed normal. The beach was quiet, with only a few people scattered along the shore. Some walked their dogs, while others stood near the water, gazing at the ocean. Clara laced up her running shoes and set off, feeling the familiar rhythm of her feet against the sand. The beach at Cape Cod had always been known for occasional shark sightings. Signs warned visitors to stay alert, but most people didn't think much of it. Clara had seen the warnings, but she never worried. She was only running near the edge, not swimming. The morning was bright and calm, and the ocean looked still. As Clara moved along her usual route, she stayed close to the water, where the sand was firmer and easier to run on. The tide was lower than normal, revealing a long stretch of damp sand. She felt good, her breathing steady, her pace smooth. Further down the beach, lifeguard Scott Hamilton, 27 years old, sat in his chair watching the water. It was still early, and the beach wasn't crowded yet. He scanned the waves, something he did instinctively, always alert for anything unusual. Over the past few weeks, there have been reports of more great white shark activity in the area. The sharks followed the seals that gathered along the coast, their main food source. Scott had heard stories from fishermen and locals about how the sharks were coming closer, but he had never seen one himself. Clara kept running, her thoughts drifting. She focused on breathing, watching the waves roll in and out beside her. A few people waved as she passed by, and she smiled, enjoying the quiet morning. Then, without warning, something large broke the water's surface just a few feet away. A dark and powerful, massive shape surged upward from the shallow surf. Water sprayed into the air as the shark's huge body thrashed forward. Clara barely had time to react before it was on her. The shark's jaws clamped around her right leg, pulling her off balance and dragging her into the water. She screamed, struggling against the force that yanked her under. The pain shot through her body as the shark's teeth cut deep. She kicked wildly, trying to free herself, but the shark was too strong. The water around her turned red. Beachgoers nearby stood frozen in shock for a moment before they started shouting for help. Scott heard the screams and looked up, instantly spotting the struggle in the water. He grabbed the rescue buoy and sprinted toward the shoreline. Clara fought with everything she had. Her instincts took over and she punched at the shark's snout, desperate to make it let go. The shark thrashed again, dragging her deeper, but for a moment, it loosened its grip. Clara gasped for air, her arms flailing, and managed to break the surface. Scott reached the water's edge, diving in without hesitation. He swam hard, reaching Clara just as the shark circled back. He grabbed her under the arms and kicked toward the shore without thinking. The shark followed closely, its shadow moving through the water behind them. Another lifeguard arrived to help pull Clara onto the sand. Blood poured from her leg, soaking into the wet sand beneath her. She moaned in pain, gripping Scott's hand tightly as he applied pressure to the wound. Now further out, the shark lingered just beyond the waves, its dorsal fin cutting through the water before disappearing into the deep. People crowded around, some calling 911 while others stood frozen, unsure what to do. The sound of sirens soon echoed in the distance as paramedics arrived. Scott and the other lifeguard helped lift Clara onto a stretcher, her face pale and shaking. As they loaded her into the ambulance, the crowd stood in silence, watching the flashing lights disappear down the road. Once so peaceful, the beach now felt different, tense, afraid. Word of the attack spread quickly. Within hours, news stations arrived, interviewing witnesses and lifeguards. Experts weighed in, explaining that great white sharks were becoming more common in the area due to increased seal populations. They believed the shark had mistaken Clara's movement for that of a struggling seal, a common hunting pattern. Clara's injuries were severe. Surgeons worked to save her leg, but the damage was too extensive. She lost part of it below the knee, a painful reminder of how quickly things could change. Despite the trauma, she remained strong, later speaking out to warn others about the dangers of getting too close to the water. For the locals, the attack was a wake-up call. Authorities increased shark monitoring efforts, and new warning signs were placed along the beach, urging joggers and swimmers to stay further inland. Lifeguards also received additional training, learning to handle shark-related emergencies more effectively. In the days following the attack, the beach saw fewer visitors. Families who once played along the shoreline now hesitated, watching the water with suspicion. Fishermen reported seeing more sharks than ever, their massive bodies moving closer to shore. Clara's story stuck with everyone who heard it. Her morning routine, something she had done for years without fear, had nearly cost her life. Even those who didn't know her felt the impact of what had happened. Scott, the lifeguard who had saved her, struggled to shake the images from his mind. The sight of the shark lunging from the water, the weight of Clara in his arms as he fought to bring her back. Those moments stayed with him. He continued working at the beach but never looked at the water the same way again. The great white shark that attacked Clara was never caught, but sightings continued in the area for months. Some believed it had moved on, while others feared it would return. Despite the increased warnings, some surfers and swimmers still ventured into the water, convinced it wouldn't happen to them. The attack served as a harsh reminder that the ocean is unpredictable. It was a life-changing event for Clara, but she refused to let it define her. Over time, she adapted to her new reality, determined to keep moving forward. The beach, once a place of peace, had become a symbol of both danger and resilience. The waves crashed relentlessly, rising higher with each passing minute. The wind howled across the coast, sending bursts of spray over the empty shoreline. The ocean was restless, churning under the darkening sky, and deep beneath the surface, something even more dangerous stirred. Locals knew better than to challenge the sea in weather like this, but the storm was an invitation for Rachel Brooks. The 34-year-old surfer had spent years chasing waves, pushing limits, and finding comfort in the chaos of the ocean. October 30th, 2024 was no different. At least that's what she thought as she paddled out into the roaring water off the coast of Oregon. The morning started with light rain, the kind that seasoned surfers barely noticed. By mid-afternoon, the clouds thickened and the wind picked up speed, turning the waves into towering walls of water. Rachel arrived at the beach with her board tucked under her arm, scanning the horizon. Aside from a few distant figures, the beach was nearly empty. Most surfers had already packed up, wary of the worsening conditions. Rachel paddled out, cutting through the cold water with practiced ease. The storm created massive waves, powerful and unpredictable, rolling in one after another. She positioned herself carefully, waiting for the right moment, feeling the pull of the water beneath her. The thrill of the challenge pushed everything else from her mind. As she caught her first wave, the wind whipped through her hair and the board sliced through the water. She leaned into the turn, controlling her speed, but the storm's force made everything feel heavier. A sudden shift in the current knocked her off balance. Before she could react, the wave slammed into her with brutal force, sending her tumbling beneath the surface. Rachel struggled to regain control in the churning water, kicking hard to break free. The ocean tossed her around, spinning her in every direction. Her board leash pulled at her ankle, anchoring her momentarily before a stronger wave dragged her farther out. Then, in the chaotic swirl, something massive moved beside her. A great white shark, nearly 18 feet long, emerged from the dark water. Disoriented by the storm, it mistook Rachel's thrashing for prey. The predator struck with terrifying force, clamping its jaws around her torso and dragging her down. The pain shot through her body, sharp and immediate, as the shark's teeth tore into her flesh. Her chest burned as she fought for air, her vision blurring with panic. Blood streamed from her wounds, swirling into the dark water, drawing the attention of other predators lurking nearby. She reached for her board, which was already drifting away, lost to the raging current. In the distance, surfers saw the struggle. A sudden splash, a flash of red in the water, and Rachel's arm flailing weakly before disappearing beneath the waves. Liam Grant, paddling nearby, caught a glimpse of her face as she resurfaced briefly, her eyes wide with terror. He shouted to the others and paddled toward her as fast as he could, his heart pounding. But before he could reach her, the shark struck again. With a sudden, brutal twist, the great white shark tore away a portion of Rachel's leg, severing it just below the knee. The force of the attack sent shockwaves through her body, and the stormy sea swallowed her screams. Her arm, still reaching for help, was next. The shark's powerful jaws closed around it, severing it with horrifying ease. Blood clouded the water, spreading quickly in the violent current. Rachel's movements slowed, her strength fading with each passing second. Liam reached her side, grabbed her limp body, and struggled to lift her onto his board. Her skin was cold, her breaths ragged, and her remaining limbs barely moved. The shark continued to circle, its dark shape looming beneath the surface, its hunger not yet satisfied. More surfers arrived, frantically forming a protective barrier around Rachel, their eyes scanning the water in every direction. They paddled with everything they had, their muscles burning as they pulled Rachel toward shore. Fear gripped them tightly. The shark's fin cut through the waves behind them, a chilling reminder of the danger. Rachel's eyes fluttered open briefly, but her body was limp, her skin turning paler with each passing moment. When they reached the shallows, lifeguards sprinted into the water, dragging Rachel onto the sand. They worked feverishly to stop the bleeding, but her injuries were severe. Her leg was gone, and what remained of her arm hung in shredded, lifeless strips. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking the sand, and her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing to stabilize her. They placed her on a stretcher, securing her wounds and checking for vital signs. The crowd of onlookers stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. The once lively beach now felt silent, filled with the weight of what had just happened. As they lifted Rachel into the ambulance, her body suddenly convulsed. The paramedics scrambled to revive her, pressing against her chest and calling out for a pulse, but there was none. Despite their efforts, Rachel's body went still. The weight of the nightmarish attack had proven too much. Lifeguards exchanged helpless glances, their hands stained with blood, while surfers stood motionless, staring at the ocean that had once been their sanctuary. The great white shark had vanished into the depths, leaving behind nothing but torn surf gear and the echoes of horror that would never fade. The storm continued to rage, masking the scene of the tragedy. The waves rolled in and out, washing away the footprints and blood, but the memory of Rachel Brooks, the fearless surfer who pushed the limits, would remain etched in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The ocean off the coast of Southern California stretched endlessly, quiet and still, beneath the afternoon sun. The blue horizon's engine's rhythmic hum mixed with waves' soft lapping against its hull. On September 12, 2023, Mike Hennessy, a 37-year-old fisherman, stood at the stern of his boat wiping sweat from his brow. The day had been long but productive, with a steady haul of yellowtail and rockfish filling the boat's coolers. Mike had been fishing these waters for years, familiar with their moods and dangers. The area was known for its abundance of marine life, but was also notorious for something far more menacing: great white sharks. Locals often spoke of sightings, but attacks were rare. Mike and his crew, Tom Jacobs, 42, Eric Nelson, 39, and Brian Carter, 27, knew the risks and carried on without fear. The day had started like any other. They had left the harbor early, watching the shoreline fade into the horizon. The weather was perfect, the sun high and spirits even higher. They worked efficiently, reeling in fish and sharing quiet moments between the action. As the afternoon dragged on, Mike decided they should pull in the line soon and head back before dusk. But something strange happened as Brian began reeling in one of the heavier lines. The line jerked hard, the rod bending at an alarming angle. Brian struggled to hold on, his knuckles turning white. Whatever was on the other end was moving with purpose, dragging the line across the water with force. Mike and Tom rushed to help secure the reel and pull it together. Then, in an instant, a massive shape exploded from beneath the surface. A great white shark, its dark form cutting through the water like a torpedo. It lunged at its catch, tearing the fish clean off the hook with a powerful snap of its jaws. The crew staggered back in shock, watching as the shark vanished into the depths just as quickly as it had appeared. Mike had seen sharks before, but nothing like this one. This one was huge, at least 22 feet long, and its bulk moved with an unsettling grace. They expected it to disappear, satisfied with its stolen meal, but it didn't. Instead, the dorsal fin re-emerged, circling the boat in slow, deliberate movements. An hour passed, then two. The shark showed no sign of leaving. It circled the boat, cutting a steady path through the water. At first, the men joked about it, pretending not to be worried. But deep down, they knew something was wrong. Sharks didn't usually stick around this long. Mike ordered the crew to pull in the remaining lines, wanting to leave the area as soon as possible. As Tom retrieved the last line, the shark struck again, ramming the side of the boat with such force that the entire vessel rocked violently. Equipment tumbled across the deck and the men struggled to keep footing. The predator's persistence was unnerving. It continued circling, its fin cutting through the darkening water as the sun dipped lower. Mike's hands shook as he gripped the railing, his eyes locked on the shark. He knew they had to get out of there before it worsened. As dusk settled, the crew fired up the engine, hoping the noise would scare the shark away. The boat pushed forward, but the shark followed, trailing them like a shadow. The tension on board grew thick. Every splash, every shift in the water, made their hearts pound harder. Darkness crept over the sea. The only light came from the boat's deck lamps. The once calm ocean now felt like a trap, and the men were trapped in it. Then, without warning, the shark attacked again. This time, it came from below, ramming the boat with enough force to crack the hull. A sickening crunch echoed through the vessel as water began seeping in. Mike rushed to assess the damage, his feet slipping on the wet deck. Before he could react, the shark struck once more, breaching the water with terrifying speed. Its massive jaws clamped onto the boat's edge, splintering the wood and sending debris flying. The impact sent Mike overboard. He hit the water hard, gasping as the cold engulfed him. Panic set in as he kicked furiously, trying to stay afloat. The shark turned toward him instantly, drawn by the splashing. Tom and Eric scrambled to throw him a rope, shouting his name as they worked to pull him back. Mike swam toward the boat, his heart pounding in his chest. Just as his fingers grasped the rope, the shark struck. Its teeth tore into his leg, dragging him under. Blood filled the water around him, turning it dark. He thrashed wildly, trying to break free. The crew pulled harder, straining against Mike's and the predator's weight. With one final desperate pull, they managed to yank him back onto the deck, collapsing in exhaustion. Mike's leg was shredded, blood pouring onto the wooden planks beneath him. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. The shark continued circling, its dark shape visible beneath the waves, waiting for another chance. Eric, shaking his hands, wrapped a tourniquet around Mike's leg. Brian frantically radioed for help, his voice cracking as he explained their situation. The Coast Guard responded, but they were miles from shore, and it would take time for rescue to arrive. The crew stayed huddled near Mike, keeping pressure on his wound and their eyes on the water. Every shadow, every ripple sent waves of fear through them. The shark wasn't leaving. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, the boat rocking gently in the dark. Eventually, the distant lights of the rescue boat appeared, cutting through the night like a beacon. Relief flooded the crew as they signaled their position. The Coast Guard arrived quickly, stabilizing Mike and assessing the damage to the vessel. They then transferred him to the rescue boat and secured him for transport back to shore. The crew watched in silence, their bodies tense with exhaustion and fear. As they were towed back, the shark finally disappeared into the depths, leaving behind only the shattered remains of their boat and the deep scars of the night's events. The men sat silently, the reality of what had happened settling in. The relentless pursuit of the great white had shaken them, a grim reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the waves. Although they had always known the risks, that night, they truly understood what it meant to be hunted.